Herzlich willkommen zu diesem heute rein virtuellen Expertengespräch zur europäischen Sozialpolitik, und ich sollte wahrscheinlich besser Streitgespräch, denn das ist üblicherweise so.
Hendrik Kafsack, I'm a correspondent of the Frankfurter Allgemeine
Herzlich
Zeitung,
willkommen zu diesem heute rein virtuellen Expertengespräch zur europäischen Sozialpolitik, und ich sollte wahrscheinlich besser Streitgespräch, denn das ist üblicherweise zur europäischen Sozialpolitik hier aus der hessischen Landesvertretung in Brüssel. Mein Name ist Hendrik Kafsack, ich bin FAZ-Korrespondent hier in Brüssel, beschäftige mich durchaus auch mit der Sozialpolitik, immer wieder mit Begeisterung, denn kaum ein anderes Thema ist derart umstritten. Bevor wir aber jetzt tatsächlich schon in die Diskussion einsteigen, möchte ich zunächst, weil das Thema ja ist, Konferenz zur Zukunft Europas, wie stärken wir wirtschaftssoziale Gerechtigkeit und Beschäftigung, das Wort der Europaministerin und heute nicht nur in dieser Funktion beteiligt.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, I would like to welcome you to another digital event from the European representation, from the Hessen representation in Brussels. In these months, we have been dealing a lot with the future and with questions concerning the future of Europe. I'm really delighted that so many members of Hessen work within the conference on the future of Europe. The Vice President of the European Parliament, Nicola Beer, Member of the European Parliament, Mr. Simon, and myself. I myself am part of the Federal Council on the Future of Europe. And in this institution, we deal with many topics of the future, one of which is also European social justice and employment. They're actually quite well summed up, social market economy. But economy and social questions are both questions that we are dealing with in detail, and we're going to see what the challenges are in a Europe where there are certain gaps, where we have stronger and weaker economies, but we all know that we do need a strong economy in order to be able to be successful within the European Union, but also beyond its borders, beyond in an environment that is worldwide challenging. I'm looking forward to an interesting debate. I'm looking forward to hearing what the experts are going to tell us today and what we can take back home to be used within our discussion on the future of Europe. Thank you, Minister Puttrich. Before moving into the debate, I would like to mention that Mrs. Nicola Beer unfortunately will not be in our debate today. She is held up in Berlin. You probably know why. There are negotiations concerning potential coalitions, and so right at this moment she will not be able to join, but I'm looking forward to a very interesting debate with the other experts that we have here. I would like to start with the Commission. The Commissioner in charge, Schmit. We have the pleasure of having Carla Perreira here. She is in charge of the European Pillar of Social Rights within the cabinet of the Commissioner Nicolas Schmit. She's expert and social advisor. She has been for many years as a head of unit in DG Employment. She was also a business consultant in the past, specialized in human performance, as I read, which is very interesting, even if I don't know what this exactly means, if I may be honest. And prior to this, and it might be that I mispronounce it, but she studied in Portugal and at the College of Europe in Bruges. A warm welcome. And as our Minister Puttrich already mentioned, we have Mr. Simon, who is with us in the European Parliament ever since 2019 in the AFCO and INTA, which means that he's dealing both with external policy and exchange. When he's not just dealing with the topic we're discussing here today, he studied legal affairs and is from Wetzlar, a professor for European right at the University of Marburg, and Dirk Meyer, who is Chief Executive Officer of HessenChemie Employers Association. He has been many years also at the Federal Employers Association as a general director. And he's also coming from the economic studies sector. I would like to hand over to Mr. Meyer. Maybe you can quickly introduce what the challenges, hopes, ideas are for the future when you look at the conference on the future of Europe. And then we will move into the discussion itself. Mr. Meyer. Thank you, Mr. Kafsack. When we're looking into the future, of course, we should always be optimistic. That is important, and we do it ourselves as well. And this is why I'm grateful that today we're discussing about the future of Europe together. We can talk about it. I don't think that we're actually debate in a heated way. What I did is on the foundation, on the basis of what we do as a employer, which means that we are in favor of European integration and the values of the European Union linked to that. If I understood correctly, the conference on the future of Europe that is taking place is also dealing with the questions on which are the future priorities for Europe, for the European Union. And in this sense, there has been a lot that has already been started. First contributions already took place, first parts of this. I checked it and I would like to show it to you here. There's a first intermediary report on what is taking place digitally on the Conference to the Future of Europe. As Mrs. Puttrich already mentioned, there's a chapter that is dealing with a stronger economy, more justice, social justice, and employment, jobs, and the debates and contributions that we have been able to collect here. Well, I would just like to mention a few keywords. They deal with, for example, more social justice in taxes, minimum tax on a European level in the area of social security. There's also an intense debate in a very broad manner concerning a non-conditional minimum income. The European Pillar of Social Rights was mentioned, which is also part of the debates that we find here. And again, the request to make it more concrete, to implement it in a concrete term. There's also a request for more budget to be brought by the members, and there are rules for telework, for work, online work, short-term internships should not be granted anymore, but also making rules easier for mobility, workers' mobility. And then last but not least, improving the growth of employment thanks to investments in innovation, education, research, and development. Now, if I reflect on that, the last point is actually dealing with the preconditions that we have that make it possible that in the social area, we can grant things in the national states and on the level also of the European Union. And this is typical for us that we tend, when we talk about employment, social policy, etc., we have a tendency to looking at how should we deal with it? What should it look like? How should we regulate it? But only at the very end, and sometimes never, are we looking into the preconditions. What are the preconditions so that we have a social Europe and that we can go into its details? And I think, and I hope that we all agree on that, this means that we need a competitive economy that offers employment, jobs, that is the basis for much more. We have collected our own thoughts. We have also brought them in thanks to the Federal Association. And this collects where we think, especially in those trying times that we have not yet overcome. We're still in a pandemic. So especially now, we have to place priorities for a new economic agenda 2030. 2030, which will offer incentives for innovation, which will also strengthen economic growth, because this growth has been totally interrupted by the pandemic and we have not yet been able to overcome it. We see that globally there is trouble, especially in the delivery chains. And of course, this concerns us in particular in the industrial nations. So when we talk about 2030, we have to look at all this when we talk about the future of Europe. And this is also a great opportunity because there is much money that has already been mobilized in order to create resilience within the single member states of the European Union. We have to make use of the Fund for Reconstruction. And I would like to underline that we have to do this in a very innovative way. We have to focus on investments. We have to talk about reforms also in the social systems. And last but not least, I would like to say it already now. And I did read your paper, Mr. Simon, that you brought into the debate. It's also about the balance between competences. You have the European Union on the one hand, the national states on the other hand. Where do their competences lie? And especially when we talk about social policy, the European pillar of social rights, we do not want that there is another gap, and as is also mentioned in the European Union's treaties, for rights, so the social areas are in the hands of the national states. This should be a first indication on my end. Also, what I think when I look at the debate concerning the future of the future in Europe, I think this is what I would like to say in the first hand. You don't want to discuss? I hand over to my colleague.
I don't know how to see it. Before we go into the discussion, we want to tell everybody that you can ask questions via email or via phone. The email address and the phone number should be on your screen. Streamline at lv-brüssel.hessen.de, and you can be very active there. You can ask questions to whomever you want, and I would like to go to Mr. Simon and to see the points that Mr. Meyer was talking about. Now,
zuletzt ist das, was Frau Ministerin Puttrich angesprochen hat, denke ich auch wichtig, dass wir das Prinzip der sozialen Marktwirtschaft, was ja ein deutsches Erfolgsmodell, auch CDU-Erfolgsmodell ist, ja in den Verträgen auch festgeschrieben haben. Und insofern ist die Europäische Union ein soziales Projekt und die soziale Marktwirtschaft fest etabliert worden. Und dafür braucht, und da knüpfe ich an das, was Herr Meyer gesagt hat, was ich auch eben unterstreichen möchte, ist eine Leistungsbereitschaft und eine leistungsbereite Wirtschaft. Und da müssen wir jetzt bei den Dingen, die im aktuellen Gesetzgebungsprozess auf europäischer Ebene verhandelt werden, Stichwort Green Deal, aber natürlich auch sehr grundsätzlich im Rahmen der Konferenz über die Zukunft Europas, sehr gut darauf achten und Sorge dafür tragen, dass wir keine Gesetzgebung produzieren, die die Leistungsfähigkeit der europäischen Wirtschaft zu stark beeinträchtigen würde oder sozusagen ja, wir unserer Wirtschaft und Industrie das Leben schwer machen und noch dazu kontraproduktiv, weil es geht ja dann um die Frage, wenn man bei uns in Europa nicht mehr produzieren kann, weil zum Beispiel die Energiepreise in die Höhe getrieben werden, es unrentabel wird, dann wandert etwa die chemische Industrie ab in andere Regionen der Welt und wir importieren dann die Güter. Und das hat natürlich unmittelbar auch Auswirkungen auf die soziale Situation in Europa. Und die grundsätzliche Frage, die wir jetzt auch im Rahmen der Konferenz zur Zukunft Europas diskutieren werden, auch da stimme ich Herrn Meyer zu. Es gibt gute Gründe, warum wir keine große soziale Umverteilung bislang gemacht haben. Die Unterschiede in den Mitgliedstaaten sind eben im sozialen Bereich, im Bereich der sozialen Versicherungssysteme sehr, sehr unterschiedlich. Und dafür gibt es auch gute Gründe, weil sie eben auch sehr spezifisch angepasst werden müssen. Und so würde ich vielleicht...
This has obviously also important roots here.
Or at least looking a little bit skeptical with regard to what Mr. Meyer and Mr. Seaman said. How do you react to those worries that they're both basically voiced in the context of the conference, the future of Europe? Is that something you can understand, share even, or not at all? And what do you expect from this conference? Some tailwind for what you have in mind with regard to this pillar of social rights, or what are your expectations?
Hello?
We can hear you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I think there is a small issue with the sound coming and hopefully not going to you, so you can listen to me well. Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid I couldn't follow completely what Dr. Simon mentioned because I couldn't hear it in English, but maybe a couple of elements in reaction to what I could follow on some other points. I think an important point to consider, of course, is that having this conference of the future of Europe is clearly an expression that the construction of Europe is an ongoing process. Of course, we are all inspired by what the founding fathers have declared a few decades ago. It needs to evolve as reality evolves and as people face a new environment, and there are new things happening in the economy. So I think this is a very important reflection to be undertaken. And obviously the fact that in the context of the conference of the future of Europe, there is a reflection around social issues is a symptom or a translation that these are concerns that people have in their daily lives. So I think we should not shy away from discussing those and discussing on the need of whether or not we should act, and if there is a need to act, who should act at which level, which seems to be one of the points raised before. Obviously, from a social and employment policy perspective, we see that the economy, the development of the economy and the development of strong social and employment policies goes hand in hand. And as it has been said, that a strong economy is a precondition for social justice and social welfare. I would also say that you cannot have a competitive, innovative economy without, for example, having quality jobs and well-remunerated jobs that actually tap into the talents that exist in Europe. So I would certainly argue that there is a tandem that needs to be constructed and preserved. And this is not a dichotomy, once against the other, I would say. The other thing I wanted to mention, of course, is that the preoccupations that we hear through the Conference of Europe, Conference of the Future of Europe, or in different spheres, very often are preoccupations that have similar points across the EU. For example, today we discuss very much what we call the Uberization of the economy, and what does this mean, for example, for working conditions in the labor market. And this is not a problem exclusive to one region of Europe or to one member state. This is an issue that is out there in most of the member states, and that governments are trying to understand and address. So I would say that having a dialogue on issues that are common, of common interest, certainly helps come up with better solutions. And of course, there might be elements or there are areas in which the member states, together with the European institutions, say, well, we want to address this together, because together we will address it more effectively. And for example, if I just take this example of the Uberization of the economy, if we think that platform work works in the virtual space, does not respect the geographical boundaries, I would argue that a solution that is future-proof needs to be one that is thought through at a scale beyond the national level, because the national solutions will soon be confronted with the fact that platforms have activities everywhere, regardless of national borders. So I think we would need to, shall I say, differentiate the different aspects of employment and social policy, and discuss those and see where there is willingness to act together before putting the element of, this should be done at regional, national, or European level, as if that is the answer to the problem. Now, of course, I'm aware that the issue of subsidiarity is always a very important point of discussion with many member states, with many German lenders. So I know very well the sensitivity around this issue. But I think it's important also to realize that more than ever, there is an expectation that Europe as a continent brings some sort of prosperity to all. And that the younger generations, while attached to their cultures and the national cultures and beliefs and way of doing, they also see themselves as citizens of bigger regional identity, regional figures, or so. I would argue that we should not discuss this issue of subsidiarity as a black or white, but case by case, is there a motive and a value added for the EU to help member states in progressing with their ideals of social progress and prosperity. Now, of course, we hear that there are many ideas coming up in the Conference of the Future of Europe. Some of them known before, others a bit more daring. And I would argue that all those ideas need to be then discussed singularly and see if there is scope to deepen the debate on those points. I hear, for example, this idea of an unconditional minimum income. I think that is, for example, a very controversial idea that would merit by itself its own debate, and therefore I don't think we are at the point of reacting to singular ideas that come through the Conference of Europe yet.
We have some connection problems, I think, but what you mainly said, I think is quite clear. I just wanted to come back to, just to clarify. So what you're not going to do afterwards is just look at what the conference proposed and then just look at what you like and come forward with a proposal, but you say we need an in-depth discussion about it afterwards between the Commission on the one side, but the member states as well on the other side. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, I think there are two levels to be considered. There is an issue related to the depth of changes that might be requested through the Conference of the Future of Europe. These are the type of exercises that then to the discussion, should we as a continent, is a debate that has such political ampleur that is certainly to be taken at a global level. And then are, of course, the singular proposals in the different fields that merit, I would say, a specific discussion on how we, the Commission, perceive the issue, but how this issue can be further debated with other EU institutions, with government, social partners, civil society. So I would say it's really premature to already wrap up on an exercise that has just started and say, okay, we will take a package and do this, or we will just accept that particular measure. I think there is a lot of water that still needs to go under the bridge for us to then say how the follow-up of the conference will materialize.
Herr Meyer, ich würde gerne an einem Punkt weitermachen, den Frau Perreira angesprochen hat, nämlich sie hat ja darauf hingewiesen, dass letztlich die Tatsache, dass diese Themen aufkommen, in gewisser Weise auch ein Symptom ist oder ein Ausdruck gewisser Sorgen, die offensichtlich die Beteiligten haben. Und das sind auf der einen Seite natürlich diejenigen, die sich über die Plattform einbringen, praktisch digital, auf der anderen Seite aber ja auch die per Zufall ausgewählt worden sind und jetzt entsprechend zusammenkommen, um bestimmte Themen zu diskutieren. Worauf ich hinaus will, ist die Tatsache, dass es diese Sorgen, diese Ängste gibt, ist das nicht ein Argument dafür, dass tatsächlich man sich dessen auch annehmen muss und dann auch in der Folge vielleicht bei bestimmten Themen, Stichwort waren die Plattformarbeiter, das auf europäischer Ebene tun muss und nicht gleich, um es mal ein bisschen provokant zu sagen, dicht macht aus deutscher Perspektive und sagt, mehr soziales Europa wollen wir nicht, Schluss aus, das war's.
Ich will Frau Perreira ausdrücklich zustimmen in diesem Punkt. Also natürlich muss eine wirtschaftliche Entwicklung und eine soziale Entwicklung am Ende Hand in Hand gehen. Ich glaube, das macht uns aus in Europa, da können wir auch stolz drauf sein. Also hier geht es nicht um Dumpinglöhne, hier geht es nicht um das Drücken von Arbeitsbedingungen, das auf keinen Fall. Aber ein zweiter Punkt, den will ich auch aufgreifen, den Frau Perreira beispielsweise angesprochen hat, nämlich wenn es einen Punkt gibt oder wenn es einen Bedarf gibt, wer kümmert sich darum? Also wo ist die richtige Stelle angesiedelt? Auf welcher Ebene reden wir dann über eine europäische Ebene? Reden wir über eine nationale Ebene? Und ich will auch noch die Ebene der Sozialpartner mit einführen, um Antworten zu finden. Wir sind hier in Deutschland ein Arbeitgeberverband, führen Tarifverhandlungen mit Gewerkschaften und regeln Arbeitsbedingungen. Und wenn da neue Dinge jetzt auftauchen, mobile Arbeitsformen, die wir jetzt noch vertieft haben in
other things like mobile forms of works, which we have been strengthening and deepening in the pandemic, then we are going to look for common solutions. Now, I'm not an expert for platform work to say how this should function, but Mr. Kafsack, coming back to your question, I will definitely not suppress certain needs or fears, but this is a central question. We're just trying to see on what level are we going to deal with the questions? In what way, in what form? Is it a strong regulation which is needed, or do we find to reply rather on another level? But of course, also as an employer, it is our task within the social market economy that we have to take on our responsibility. We are going to do this, but on the other hand, we're also going to say where there are hurdles that don't help us, that don't create any positive effect. And let's, for example, talk about what has been discussed long, the posting directive, the posting of workers directive. I think right now we have 24 procedures that are currently underway, because even the countries did not understand what they should deal. So we actually created a lot of difficulty here. There are many infringement procedures, and this is actually something where we went too far. Of course, we have to impede dumping, but if you see such a great number of infringement procedures, then we didn't find the right reply. So this is all about how do I deal with the need? What is the right way of replying to this? Mr. Meyer? In order to be dealing with this correctly, I was under the impression that we should rather regulate what we can on a national level. And there must be a great argument that's quite hot. And as Mrs. Pereira just said, well, both must go hand in hand, but I'm not sure if what you say is not a bit taken to a bit too far. Well, maybe it was too polite, what I said. The topics and the small topics. And this is also true for social policies. And then we have the subsidiarity principle and tariff autonomy. And where we can regulate things in the social policies, for example, in employment conditions ourselves, then we should do it. And we have to do it ourselves because we're closer. But this is exactly where I say I don't have any European precondition. We also say it very often in Germany, we don't need national pre-regulations because in our area, of course, we are regulating things ourselves, for example, in chemical industries. And if there's too much regulation, which is too hard, then I cannot say that we don't create something, that we create something positive. We rather create hurdles and red tape and sometimes even legal insecurity. Minimum salaries, for example. We have things where we cannot deal on a European level and in a common way, because this has to be done by the national states. And in some areas, well, we really have to be careful of not creating too much red tape. But what I said initially went into another direction. if we only debate this part, then we actually are not looking at what all that we should look at, because there's also the question of making Europe competitive. And again, there's an Asian economic area, there's an American area, and Europe has to see what to do in a more and more competitive global world. And we have to try to be successfully positioning ourselves, because we need also successful social market, which is a precondition for the social economy. And then we can look at where do we regulate and what do we regulate on what level. Subsidiarity, as close as possible to the needs, as close as possible also to the local level. Mr. Simon, as a member of the European Parliament, I would like to mention one point that was also underlined by Mrs. Pereira. She insinuated that the way that we're discussing right now has a very German way of seeing things. Maybe, if I might say, also created a bit by older German gentlemen, and the young people might be seeing things in a different manner. Now, you, as a member of the European Parliament, you gratefully have to have a close collaboration with all the member states. Do you think this is accurate? Is this also something that is happening maybe just in the northern area, the German and Dutch manner, and diametrical? So is it opposite to what, for example, is happening in the south, or in France at least? This way of thinking and regulating? Unfortunately, sometimes I'm under the impression that there is a north-south difference. So the economically stronger and the economically weaker member states, and that there's also, well, that this is the main thing. I don't really see a gender gap there, but the first thing, which is most important, a clear political reply on my side, which I would have also hoped for a stronger point in the program Next Generation EU. What we have to do in Europe, and this is where I see the added value of the European Union, is that the macroeconomical gap should be shortened. And I think this can be done if we invest with added value in the Southern European member states, where we work with ambitious and maybe connect this with ambitious plans in the Green Deal. For example, one energy source of the future, of course, would be hydrogen. And if you link this to sun and to wind technology, I think Next Generation EU could be less used to give money to the member states for investments or something, because sometimes I'm not really happy about the feedback. But if we look at a bigger area, and for example, in an industrial way, we invest in hydrogen production, hydrogen electricity production on an industrial level, then I think this would have been quite a big investment in the future, in the best interest of the European Union, because this would actually help weaken the gap. And the second point, and maybe this leads away from what Mr. Meyer said, of course, it's also about standards, because if we have a common single market, then worker standards have to be, employment standards have to be Europe-wide, and they also have to be controlled and implemented. And I think in Germany, we have a deficit there, maybe not that much in the area of chemicals, but if I look at employment in transport, in long-haul transport, for example, well, there's definitely no fair competition. And there might be also distortions of the single market where we have looked away for too long and where we have now regulation deficits. But I think it's rather more a deficit in implementation than in regulation. And I think this is a dilemma of the European Union, because the member states are in charge of implementation, and this might not be something we can change rapidly.
what you say, and then the other side they say, but not really. So what do you see a way to bring both positions in line, or is that simply something you have to live with, that there is always the German side who does not agree with the ambitious social policy plans the Commission does have, or at least your Commissioner has?
Yes, well, first of all, I would like to move away from this presumed conflict north-south of Europe. I think to be honest, that is not the, let's say, the drive that should it's not the issue that should drive our energy. I think the important thing is to realize we are in a continent that has interdependent economies. We are in a single market. We have agreed to live together, and in that, I think the aspirations of the German people will be very similar to the aspirations of the Portuguese people. I come from Portugal, for example, or the Maltese or the Romanians. I think I would argue that everyone is looking for stability of income in their lives, to have some sense of belonging to a community, to be able to participate in democratic processes. So I don't think we are, in terms of the aspirations, very far away. I think I have more difficulties in describing my aspirations to an Asian than I would have in describing them to a citizen from the region of Hessen. So I don't think this is the point. I think the point is that we are in interconnected economies that do have impact on each other. If I'm able to enjoy the beauties of the single market as a consumer, I want to believe that there are others that will be able to enjoy the same minimum social standards wherever they live, not because simply they were born, I don't know, now for a case of that is not to be taken as an issue, but I don't know, if you're born in Bucharest and not in Paris, or if you're born in Vilnius and not in Berlin, that you are by definition cut of certain social ambition. So I think the point is that we have moved together as a continent. Young people do see themselves placed in broader horizons than the national geography. Otherwise, you would not be able to explain the success of programs, emblematic programs like Erasmus, for example. So I do think that there is a new conscience in terms of belonging, of being a citizen of Europe, of citizen of the world, and this needs to be acknowledged. And the third point is that we do have in the current developments phenomena that are beyond borders. I mean, technological progress is pushing us to try to understand, for example, our relationship with machines in a way that we have never done before. So if I'm sitting in my region in Coimbra alone, will I find a better solution than if I'm talking with someone that is sitting in Berlin and looking at the same issue? I would say no. So I think there are elements that do call for a collective sense of shared prosperity. There are values that we have embraced, and these, whenever need a European answer, we should be able to deliver one. And we should not, that's again, we should not revert the question and say, first of all, let's decide who does things, and then look at the matter. And in any case, I think the treaties are very clear in terms of the competencies of the different levels. And every time the Commission puts forward any proposal, it is in full respect of those competencies and what is in the treaty. So I don't think there is any ambiguity there or any issue related to trying to suppress subsidiarity. If things are done better at local, regional, national level, they should be done local, at regional or national level. If they can be done a little bit better at European level, then we should also consider it in accordance to the treaty.
Isn't the Commission, to be a little bit provocative, not always answering the question, should that be on a not global, European level with yes, and subsidiarity is something that's nice to talk about, but in the end not really that important. I mean, when we're talking about the minimum wage, for example, Mr. Meyer mentioned before, I mean, there are of course some people who say this is clearly not the competence of the European Commission to deal with, and that should be left to the member states. And yet you're pushing farther and farther when it comes to minimum wage. If I saw a leak of the Commission working program for next year a couple of days ago, there's another communication on minimum wages or minimum income mentioned there. So it does not seem to me that you're actually really taking a step back, but rather going forward and trying to strain the treaties as far as possible.
I guess it's a direct question to me.
Indeed.
Let me just say that the political mandate of this college has been certainly discussed and agreed with those in Parliament who represent the different peoples in Europe. It has been discussed with the governments representing the Council, and indeed the issue of minimum wage is one that preoccupies many people in Europe, because you do see that a lot of what we now call essential work after the pandemic has been really low remunerated. So this has been a preoccupation for many people in Europe. And if you have the occasion to look at the Commission proposal, you will see that we do respect the competences of each other. This is actually confirmed by the legal experts in the different EU institutions. And what we have put on the table is a proposal to support the member states in creating some sort of positive dynamic around minimum wage, so that there is convergence, there is shared prosperity, but also defending the principle that when there is an understanding between the parties in a given sector or at national level between employers and employees and there is an understanding through collective bargaining, this should be totally respected. If there is one thing that we put forward in this framework of the minimum wage is certainly the power and the value of collective bargaining and the power and value of living to the different levels, the possibility of coming together to find a minimum wage protection that is suitable in that sector or in that country. Just to say that, just to maybe specify that what is referred for next year is a proposal for a council recommendation on minimum income.
And you wouldn't be willing to tell us already what is going to be in that recommendation, of course. I will not push any further. Mr. Simon, ist ein Problem in diesem ganzen Zusammenhang, ich will jetzt nicht weiter über das Thema Minimum
There's another problem. I don't want to go further into detail on minimum wages, but there's something else. Even if we're very enthusiastic about the Conference on the Future of Europe and the contribution of citizens, the economy as such has a quite difficult stance in that sense and is not heard enough. Do you think this is true? Possibly. Of course, we have to look at the history of this conference and the reasons. An erroneous narrative. The last treaty change did not happen because of the referendum in France and the Netherlands, and it was made clear that it would be because the citizens were not entirely involved, but in the end, this is not true because they were national topics. So this time we tried to involve more citizens, and I would say that the thesis that was mentioned here between the lines is in parts that the randomly selected citizens, at least when we're talking about the representatives from interest groups that took part in the last after discussion, there was a certain hard debate and the economy wasn't represented at all at that point, or at least not much. And I think that was quite manipulative. Up to this day, I don't understand clearly how these lobbying groups had been selected. And the citizens' events that are happening, well, I don't really understand how they have been selected. Myself, I'm of the opinion that we should all discuss with each other and learn from each other, but I do think that the parliamentary and representative democracy in the end is the best form of organization for democracy. And we have to see what can we actually take from these events and these contributions. But my first impression was that the associations from the economy were either not there or at least not very much. Mr. Meyer, I think this deserves reaction from your side. So there was also a certain fear that for years the economy was listened to too much and that now the pendulum is going into the other direction, so to say. This is something that has been mentioned a little bit. Is that correct? Personally, I can guarantee you that we did not say no to any invitation to take part in any panel, but it's a very important point that you say. How do you make yourself be heard? Of course, interests can be different, and that is clear, that is normal. Decisions are taken on a political level in the end, that's normal as well. But perspective means, and I think this is the most important point that I can defend today, we have big tasks lying ahead of us in Europe, really huge tasks, topics such as decarbonization. We want to transform our economies in order to be serving climate protection. And this is also true for the chemical industry. We're talking about digitization, which is also something where we're in a global competition. Demographics, that is not a topic that we can do away with. And also we're coming out of a crisis which is not yet entirely overcome, this pandemic. So we have to be back in form in the countries of the European Union. We have to be fit again. And I think this is the main task, where it is not enough to just talk about objectives at the horizon. No, the industry and the politicians have the task to define the path ahead. You said that, Mr. Simon, hydrogen might be best put into the south, but we do also need it in Germany. The entire question of energy, these are huge topics. And I would like to come back to what I said before. money. We financed debt, we financed investment. There was a lot of money, and now we have to invest and use this money into investments for the future with reforms. And also social topics are important. But if we discuss only social topics without looking also at the economy, then we're going to create another disparity, well, it totally goes out of line then. And this is what I fear, that we go up to the right to disconnect. Maybe this is important for single persons, but for us, and here I want to say that the European Commission is not looking at the right thing. We have to look at the big topics, and this is where there's a lot where we should, on a national level and a European level, have framework conditions, because as an industry, as an economy, we want to do that, but we first have to walk the path successfully.
Too much to the people and not enough to the ones who actually provide the work for the people, in the context of the conference, that is.
Well, to be honest, I'm not directly involved in the organization of the Conference of the Future of Europe, so it would be reckless of me to make any judgment of how things are going. What I can say, however, is that in any debate that the Commission undertakes on different files, on different topics, and now I come to the one I know best, which is employment and social policy. There is clearly always the eagerness, the interest, the curiosity, but also the care to listen to everyone. And that is also obviously the industry, the services, so I would not say that from my direct experience there is a lack of consultation towards industry. I cannot comment on what is happening on the Conference of Future of Europe, to be honest, because I'm not directly involved in its organization. But it seems to me that if there are issues related to that, there will be certainly opportunities to remediate if the concern is brought to those who are chairing the Conference of the Future of Europe.
Herr Siemann, bringt mich abschließend nochmal zu Ihnen, bevor ich nochmal Ihnen das Wort kurz gebe.
You, prior to handing over to Mr. Meyer, there's another question from Mr. Thomas Mann, a former member of the European Parliament, because you might know him also from another area. He said that the online platform has only seen little participation so far, only 28,000 followers, which is not much if you consider the European Union. The question is, how can you strengthen that? And how can you bring controversial topics such as the Posting of Workers Directive or the unconditional minimum wage, that they are not the best to create more interest? So how can you create more interest? Well, my personal focus is different. I would come back to the first question. In 2000, we had the Lisbon strategy that was agreed by the heads of state and government, that planned that the European Union within 10 years would become the most competitive knowledge-based area of the world. And this did not have success. It was actually forgotten completely because we set our priorities completely wrongly. And this leads me to your question. I don't place my priorities on this, and the conference will not have success if we have 280,000 instead of 28,000 persons. I cannot even recognize that there is knowledge resulting from this. And I don't even imagine that the majority of Europeans would feel more listened to. Personally, For me, this is a completely marginalized way of looking. I think it's more important that we start working and ask the central questions. How can Europeans today be able to act in the world? We have to rebuild the European Union from a place of protecting each other together to protecting each other in a bigger world. We have to reform the institutions to strengthen legitimacy. And this is where we have to start working, start talking. And then usually in Europe, what we do is that we write texts, we present drafts, which have to be proposed to the European Parliament, to other institutions, to the governments, etc., and then we were going to start. But if we are only thinking about, oh my God, whom else could we involve, whom else could we bring into the discussion, well, then we won't move forward. So for me, the success of this conference is not the number of people who take part on a platform. For me, European is always a very complicated topic where we have, well, with which we have to live. My personal question as a member, well, I think it's more important that we start working, make concrete proposals how to strengthen the capacity of acting for citizens in this 21st century. Thank you very much. I think that you also, Mr. Meyer, think that it's better not to discuss minimum wages or the Posting of Workers Directive rather than leading it into a wrong direction. Is that right? Yes, that is correct. I can actually only add to what Mr. Simon said. I would like to wish that in future we focus on the right priorities within the European Union. And these are priorities that also move into external policies, safety, exchange, commerce, which has been really neglected these past years. Trading, commerce has been totally neglected. So we should to focus on the main topics and not go into ever further detail. This is what I wish, what I hope for, last but not least. And I hope that the conference on the future of Europe will set its priorities in this sense without neglecting the other topics. But we have to find new priorities. Thank you very much, Mr. Meyer, Mr. Simon, Mrs. Pereira. It was a hot debate in the end. I would like to indicate that on the 12th of October at 1 p.m. there will be another event concerning elections in the Czech Republic, and on the 14th, so 2 days after, on 1 p.m. there will be an event on the expectations of the small and medium-sized enterprises on the EU Strategy 2021. I wish you a wonderful afternoon. I hope that you're able to enjoy the weather as much as possible as well. Thank you very much for your attention.